Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at Spirit Man Jinn by Ahmed Hulusi.
Okay.
And it's a book that really digs into some interesting stuff.
Mm.
It talks about all these unseen energies and how they can affect our lives. You know, we actually have excerpts from the book itself, and the translator's preface even says that this could be a real, a real eye-opener,
Yeah, for sure.
for people who really want to understand those hidden forces,
Yeah,
all the things that are kind of just beyond what we can normally see and sense.
absolutely. And I think that's really what Hulusi is trying to do here. He wants to kind of guide us through understanding these big concepts like spirit man and jinn.
Right, yeah.
And what's really interesting is how he brings together like science and spirituality to back up what he's saying.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I thought was so cool. Um, he even says that what people think are alien encounters
Right.
could actually be them interacting with Jinn.
Yeah, that's a big claim.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to break that down?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Hulusi starts by grounding his arguments in the ideas of modern physics.
Okay.
So he uses big names like Einstein, Planck, and Schrodinger to make the point that matter is basically energy at its core,
Okay.
and that the universe is just this massive collection of waves.
So instead of seeing separate objects and beings, it's more like we're all just part of this giant energy field.
Exactly. It's all interconnected.
Yeah, that's a tough one to really grasp.
Yeah. He uses a really interesting analogy to help explain it.
Okay.
Imagine looking at your living room with a microscope that's so strong, it magnifies everything a billion times.
Wow.
You wouldn't see furniture or anything like that. You would just see this huge ocean of atoms all blended together.
So no separation, just everything kind of merging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It breaks down that illusion that we normally see.
That's a pretty powerful image.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, though, if we can only pick up on a tiny part of all these waves with our senses. What else could be out there? Could that be how these beings we're going to talk about exist, outside of our normal perception?
That's a great question, and Hulusi really digs into that when he starts talking about the human spirit, which he calls ruh.
Okay.
He uses a verse from the Quran that says that the spirit comes from God's command and that we only have a limited understanding of it.
So it's like this mysterious force that's both personal and connected to something way bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And Hulusi bridges this religious idea with a scientific one.
Okay.
He says that the spirit is like a wave-based body that's always being formed and updated by what's happening in our brain.
So all our thoughts and experiences are shaping our spirit?
Right. It's constantly evolving based on the information it's getting.
Hold on, a wave-based body. Does that mean our spirit is literally made of energy waves? Like how he described the universe.
That's exactly what he's saying.
Oh, wow.
He argues that the spirit is part of the sea of energy just like everything else.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So if our spirit is like this ever-changing energy form, what happens to it after we die?
This is where it gets really interesting. Hulusi says that because the spirit holds all the data and beliefs from our life,
Okay.
it keeps existing even after death.
Mm.
And he says that some spirits might even feel sensations based on that information. Imagine feeling like you're buried alive because that's what you believed would happen.
That's pretty intense. It makes you think about what we carry with us throughout our lives,
Yeah,
both physically and spiritually.
absolutely. And this leads us to the jinn. Well, Hulusi really emphasizes that the Quran clearly talks about jinn as beings created from smokeless fire.
So not fire like we usually think of it, something more I don't know, ethereal or something.
Right, it's not a physical fire. He describes them as having holographic wave bodies,
Okay.
meaning they exist as energy patterns that aren't limited by time and space in the same way we are.
So they're out there in this universe of waves, just like our spirits, but they're playing by different rules.
That's the idea. And what's fascinating is that Hulusi says he actually encountered jinn himself on a trip to Mecca.
Really?
He describes them as looking like partridges flying above him and playing tambourines.
Jinn playing tambourines. I wasn't expecting that.
It's a vivid image, right? But it highlights how our limited perception might be messing with what we're seeing.
Okay.
If they exist as these wave-based beings, their interactions with our world could easily seem supernatural or otherworldly to us.
Right. And that brings us back to his point about people mistaking Jinn for aliens.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if our five senses are only showing us a tiny fraction of what's really out there.
Right. How much are we misinterpreting?
Yeah.
That's a question Hulusi wants us to think about. He's saying there's a lot more to the world than we realize.
Okay.
And that includes the possibility of these unseen beings like Jinn having an impact on our lives in ways we might not even be aware of.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I am definitely hooked. Now, we need to take a break, but when we come back, we'll dive deeper into how these jinn actually interact with humans.
Sounds good.
All right, so we're back, and we've got this picture of like a universe made of waves, spirits that are shaped by our brains, and jinn flying around playing music.
Yeah.
But it sounds like their interaction with humans is a lot more than just, quick glimpses and sounds, right?
Yeah, definitely. Hulusi gets into what he calls open contact, where jinn can actually form these direct and sometimes manipulative relationships with people.
Okay, so not just partridges playing music in the distance, but real intentional interactions. How does it even work?
Well, he says there are two main ways this happens.
Okay.
One is through force, like where the jinn just overpowers the human's will.
Wow.
And the other is more sneaky, where they appeal to our desires and weaknesses to gain control.
So they're basically playing on our vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And he gets really specific about how they do this.
Like how?
Well, he says jinn can actually manipulate our brain waves to create different effects.
Right.
Like they could trigger the pain centers in our brain, and we'd feel this intense pain even though nothing's physically wrong.
So like phantom pain, but caused by a jinn? That's terrifying.
Yeah, or they could stimulate the fear centers.
Oh.
And make us feel totally overwhelmed with terror.
Making it easier to control.
Exactly.
That's chilling to think our own brains could be used against us like that.
It really makes you question what's truly us and what might be coming from outside.
Right. And I guess that's how he explains things like psychic phenomena and mediums.
Yeah.
The jinn could be messing with the medium's brain waves to make it seem like they're talking to spirits.
Exactly.
So those spooky seances and messages could just be clever jinn tricks.
It's possible.
I'm starting to see how this connects to the alien encounter idea, too. If they can mess with our perception, the possibilities are endless.
Right. They could make us see or hear anything they want.
Okay, this is getting a bit intense. It's like a really dark side to this whole jinn thing.
It can be. But Hulusi does offer some ways to recognize and protect ourselves from these influences.
Okay, good. Like what?
Well, he says to pay attention to how people who claim to have spiritual authority talk about things like oneness and fate.
Okay.
Those who are heavily influenced by jinn might avoid these topics because they expose the limits of the jinn's understanding.
So they're trying to keep control by steering clear of certain ideas.
Right. It's a red flag to watch out for.
What else?
He also says to avoid smoking.
Smoking. Seriously?
Yeah, he believes it can actually attract jinn.
That's not something I would have expected. Is there a reason why?
He doesn't go into a lot of detail, but it seems like certain substances can weaken our spiritual defenses
Okay.
and make us more vulnerable to negative jinn influence.
That makes sense. And of course, he talks about the importance of prayer,
Absolutely.
especially certain prayers from the Quran.
Yes, he believes those act as a barrier against negative interference.
So it's about strengthening our own spiritual core and being aware of our weaknesses.
Exactly. It's about taking control of our own spiritual well-being.
But with all this talk about manipulation and deception, it makes me wonder, could jinn be behind some of the extreme beliefs and ideologies we see in the world? If they can influence individuals, could they influence whole groups of people?
That's a really interesting question, and it's something Hulusi addresses directly when he talks about how jinn use religion as a tool for manipulation.
So we're back, and this idea that jinn could use religion to manipulate people is pretty disturbing.
Yeah, it's a serious topic, and Hulusi's really clear about it. He says that jinn have two main ways to control humans through religion.
Okay.
They can do it secretly by staying hidden, or they can be more open and pretend to be someone they're not.
So in that first scenario, how do they influence people without revealing themselves? It's like they're pulling the strings for the shadows.
Right. Imagine someone who seems really religious, maybe even experiences things that seem like miracles.
Okay.
But then they start promoting ideas that are a little off from traditional Islamic teachings.
Like what's...
Well, they might start twisting the idea of oneness, suggesting that individuals are actually God themselves.
Well, that's a pretty big change.
Yeah, and it's a way for the jinn to manipulate people's understanding of God.
Are there any specific examples of that kind of distortion?
Hulusi points to the idea of pantheism,
Okay.
where the concept of God is kind of mixed up with the natural world, so the line between the creator and creation becomes blurred. He also mentions the idea of reincarnation being promoted, even though it goes against Islamic belief.
It's like they're taking familiar ideas and twisting them just enough to make them sound appealing.
Right. They're playing on people's desire for spiritual growth, but ultimately leading them in the wrong direction.
Okay, that's sneaky and dangerous. But what about those more obvious methods where the jinn don't even try to hide?
Well, Hulusi talks about cases where Jinn use things like pencils or automatic writing to talk to and control people.
Wait, like a jinn-possessed pencil writing messages?
hmm
That sounds like something out of a horror movie.
It does sound strange, but he gives some pretty compelling examples.
Like what?
He talks about one case where a Jinn pretended to be an angel named Bashir al-Kiram,
Okay.
and it used a pencil to convince this person that they were spiritually superior.
A pencil?
Yeah, the pencil would write messages, answer questions, even make predictions about the future.
Predictions.
Yeah,
So like fortune-telling, but with a jinn controlling the pencil.
exactly. And sometimes these predictions would be about small details of things that were going to happen, which made the person believe the Jinn even more.
Wow. It's like they're building this whole illusion to gain the person's trust.
Right, and once they have that trust, they can start giving the person false religious rulings, or fatwas.
Fatwas.
Yeah.
For those who might not know, what are those exactly?
A fatwa is basically a legal opinion on Islamic law.
Okay.
It's given by a qualified scholar called a mufti.
Got it.
But in these cases, the Jinn are pretending to be the source of these rulings.
So they're twisting religious authority to manipulate people.
Exactly. And it can get even more extreme. Hulusi mentions cases where Jinn make people believe they're the Mahdi.
The Mahdi. Isn't that like a messianic figure in Islam?
Yes, it is.
So they're creating false prophets. That's incredibly dangerous.
It is. They're taking advantage of people's deeply held beliefs in hopes to manipulate them into becoming leaders or prophets who could lead others astray.
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah.
Do you think this is something that only happens in Islam? Or could jinn exploit any religion?
That's a good question. Hulusi focuses on Islam because that's the context of his work,
Right.
but the principles he lays out could apply to any belief system that has a spiritual element.
So anytime there's faith and a desire for connection, there's the potential for manipulation.
Exactly.
This really highlights how important it is to think critically and use discernment no matter what you believe.
Absolutely. And Hulusi gives some advice on how to protect ourselves.
Like what?
He stresses the importance of knowledge, understanding what jinn are, their limitations, and their goals.
Okay.
And he also emphasizes the power of certain prayers from the Quran, which he believes can shield us from their negative influence.
So knowledge is a form of protection and prayer as a spiritual defense.
Exactly.
But in the end, it sounds like it all comes down to personal discernment. We can't just accept everything we hear, even if it seems to be coming from a religious source.
Right, we have to question things, investigate, and develop our own understanding of what's true and what might be manipulation.
Yeah, that's a powerful message. This deep dive has been incredible. We've gone from the universe being a sea of waves to the dangers of jinn messing with our beliefs and actions. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's also really thought-provoking. Hulusi's work pushes us to expand our understanding of reality, to consider the possibility of unseen forces, and to be more discerning in a world where things aren't always what they appear to be.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we're wrapping up this deep dive. We hope you found it as fascinating and mind-bending as we did. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and stay curious.